We are now back on the record. The time is 1 p.m. and we will now resume the hearing. We are in the process of questioning Northwestern's witness number 3, Cynthia Fang. And it is time for commissioner questions. We have finished with Commissioner O'Donnell and now we have Commissioner Pinocci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So let's take a look at economics. By putting in the smart meter, we need less meter readers. We now have the ability to turn the power on and off without someone going out remotely on site. So I've got to assume we save thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of labor. Does that sound correct?
Sure, you're correct that there are labor savings. It's important to understand, though, that the function of having the information communicated from those meters continues to be a need. And so what's happening is instead of man hours going out to read those meters, what's happening is the mesh technology is taking over that functionality. And so it's more of a cost replacement than necessarily just cost savings without some sort of replacement.
Let's try this question. There had to have been a meeting at Northwestern Energy that said, when we get all of this infrastructure put in and the meters are in, we're going to need less meter readers and we're going to need less people to go out and turn on the meters manually and turn them off manually. And we're going to need less employees and we're going to save X amount of man hours that's billable. So the company's got to be more profitable. That meeting had to have taken place. And the other reason I believe that it's a good question is all the other power companies are doing it because obviously it saves time, money, less employees. I'm just kind of curious, did anyone come up with a number? We're going to save X amount of dollars a year.
Well, as I mentioned, the reality is while there would be a reduction in costs associated with meter readers, there are increasing costs associated with the mesh technology, the technology needed to be able to enable the benefits of AMI. So net, there isn't just the savings associated with the reduction in meter readers. And that is consistent with what we see with other utilities that have implemented AMI.
Well, maybe they're saving money and don't want to say they are. So we could skin the cat this way. Did we do all of this change and not save any money and spend more?
As I mentioned, the purpose of AMI is really focused on the customer. And so we do believe that this newer technology will enable customers to have much greater benefits than they had without it. And so the focus is on the customer benefits. And to be able to enable those benefits, it will require more investments in technology.
Sitting on the board of directors of a water association, we did it because we were going to save money of not going and physically after reading the meters. So I hear this in other meetings that we're doing this because the time in physically going out and reading the meters is a tremendous savings, right? So I think it's a question. And then my next question is any of this savings going on to the ratepayer? I got to ask that question. And even though I have a feeling I know your answer, is there any savings that can be passed on to the ratepayer being we're saving? Let's start here. How many jobs are we cutting based on this?
I don't know the answer to that question. When we look at the overall deployment of our AMI project, that actually is addressed as part of our 2022 rate case. So that discussion is there. Regarding those, the labor savings on that, there will need to be more investments in technology to get the customer benefits that we want to make sure to deliver to our customers from AMI. So earlier when we were talking about some of the notifications that would be available to customers, you know, the ability to get an alert sometime in the middle of your billing month that your usage is, let's say, 10% above what it was last month. So right now we're able to provide customers with their interval data upon request, but for us to be able to enable that to be something that someone can actually get an alert on their phone or an alert through email or some sort of notification, that requires more of investment than just the installation of the AMI meters.
I could see where the upfront costs could be substantial. But in a few years, or maybe in a year or two, the savings of somebody must have had a meeting to say, we have this many meter readers. After this equipment's in, we're going to cut our meter readers to how much. That meeting had to have taken place. Has it? Have we decided that our goal is to cut half the meter readers or 3/4 of the meter readers out? The staff that goes out and turns meters on and off, we're going to have to cut that workforce by half. They simply won't have anything to do. We put these meters in. I don't have to send a guy out to the house to pull the meter. We do it, you know, with a push of a button. Did they say this is how many jobs we'll cut? Did that meeting take place?
So generally, when we're thinking about that particular group of employees, most of those employees in general, what we tend to see across the industry is a redeployment into other activities. So while they might not be meter reading, though, keep in mind, as we consider different opt-out options, there will continue to need to be meter readers. A lot of times what you see in the industry is those meter readers take on different jobs within the company.
Well, the ratepayers thinking that there'll be hundreds of jobs cut, won't need them. And of course, they're wondering if the savings will go back to them. If there is a savings in a couple of years, maybe after the infrastructure is built and we paid for the expense of putting these meters in, and we realize that hundreds of jobs won't be needed anymore, do you think there's a possibility that we do have a savings, that the money could go back to the ratepayer or lower rates?
Well, of course, every time we come in for a rate case, all of those issues are assessed. And so if at a future date, there is changes in the staffing of Northwestern, that would definitely be reflected in future rate cases.
So the next question would be, let's say there is a savings. Could we then not charge the customers extra if they kept their old meter, being that was the deal they had for years of not being charged extra to begin with? Do you think that's a possibility? If there is a savings, we could pass it on to those and not charge extra for keeping the old meter.
Well, I think the challenge ends up being that it continues to be costs associated with maintaining an option. And there are incremental costs associated with maintaining those options. And this is where, from Northwestern's perspective, we believe that it's appropriate for participating customers in a program to at least pay some share of those incremental costs rather than have it borne by all ratepayers. And so as things change, this can continue to be something that gets re-examined. And that's where, from Northwestern, we believe it's appropriate to find some balance between the needs of our participating customers asking for these options versus the rest of our customers.
Well, the point from the customer is, if we're going to take the smart meter that's going to cost less because they don't have to have a meter reader come out, it's going to cost less because they don't have to turn it on and off manually. They should get a break for taking the smart meter, while the people that have the old meters, rates should stay the same. Do you think that that's a good question for the ratepayer to bring up and ask me to ask you? What are your thoughts there?
Well, and this is where I was hoping that I feel like I've responded to that question. The reality is, with AMI, the fewer numbers of meter readers, those costs are not seen in isolation. There will be additional costs to continue with what enables AMI. So those costs are, though, that cost reduction is replaced by other costs. When it comes to the question of retaining an AMR, that meter would become a non-standard meter, which requires incremental costs for us to be able to continue to maintain an outdated legacy option.
No more questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. President Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Fang. I was participating remotely yesterday, so I presume you were in the room during
Yes.
yesterday's testimony, correct?
Yes, I was.
All right. So do you recall my line of questioning to Mr. Thurman?
Yes, I do.
And you recall essentially the thrust of that line of questioning was whether or not customers are being separately charged by Northwest Energy for meter readings or self-reading, et cetera, currently.
I do recall that. There is no incremental charge for that currently.
Okay. In what year did the company roll out the AMI project? When did you start? If you know.
I know I should know the answer to this. I don't recall off the top of my head. The rollout did begin before I joined Northwestern. It is in testimony if you give me just a minute.
Sure.
Northwestern began its deployment in April of 2021 in
Okay.
Montana.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. So back to Mr. Thurman, was there, based on your memory, was there any answer that Mr. Thurman gave to my line of questioning that you would disagree with, that the charges are recovered through rate case? And I can ask you individually if that would be helpful.
I think it would be, just to make sure that I'm fully accurate as far as my recollection.
Okay, so the first question I had for Mr. Thurman was, is Northwest Energy currently charging customers for meter readings?
The cost of meter readings are recovered through base rates, and so there is some recovery of those costs. Customers are not being charged individually for those costs.
And then I asked the question if whether Northwest Energy is charging a fee to customers to exchange an existing AMR meter for an AMI meter.
Customers currently are not receiving any incremental charges associated with that change.
And those charges would be recovered in a rate case?
The cost of the AMI project is being addressed in the 2022 rate case. It is Northwestern does not have any proposal for it to be a separate cost outside of base rates.
Okay, what is the test year for the 2022 rate case?
The 2022 rate case is based on a 2021 test year with a 2022 known and measurable.
Very good. Okay. So let me take you now to your direct testimony, page 4. You have that in front of you.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. Please go to lines 3 through 5.
Yes.
I think you'd agree with me that this portion of your testimony, you identify costs associated with the non-communicating digital meter and the costs of installation of the same, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so based on that, how much of the costs you identify there for electric, which I think you identify as $111.54, is actually for the cost of the meter? Do you know?
Yes, and you can actually find the reference on that in the exhibit 5 associated with John Thurman's testimony. And on that, you'll see that for electric, the cost of a non-communicating digital meter is identified as $45.78, whereas the installation costs are $65.76, totaling the $111.54.
All right, thank you for that answer. Okay, so let's turn now to the cost you identify in your testimony for natural gas, which I believe was $120.06.
Yes.
I'll ask you the same question for that. How much is that for the gas meter?
So for the gas meter, it's $12.50. And for the installation, it's $107.56.
Okay. So based on that, if the cost of a gas meter is, did you just testify to $12.50?
Yes, I did.
That begs the question, then why should a customer with 2 gas meters and no electric meter be charged $30 for a second meter?
The reason for that was in trying to sort of balance how complicated the tariff would be. If we were to adjust the pricing so that we were pricing electric and gas separately, the option would be a $45 charge for the second electric meter and a $12.50 charge for the second gas meter. So that certainly is an option for Northwestern. What we did is we basically split the difference and did the average between the 2 costs for the second meter to simplify what the tariff would look like.
Okay, thank you. Just a clarification question. Are there customers that only have gas meters and no electric meters?
I'm sure there are.
Okay. Madam Chairman, continuing on this line of questioning, Ms. Fang, do you know how much an AMR meter costs?
I do not.
Do you know of anywhere in testimony that's in the record that's been provided?
I do not know.
Okay. All right. Unless we come up with an answer somewhere, I would request, Madam Chair, that maybe that be addressed as part of the post-hearing briefing.
So ordered.
Okay, I want to take you back to Mr. Brown's. Mr. Brown, do you have an answer for us, perhaps?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Brown, I was just scratching my head a little bit, wondering if it sounds like a factual question of what the AMR meters cost. I don't know if I think the question
was AMR.
AMR. I'm not sure briefing is an appropriate place to
bring that's fair.
Facts into the record. I would just note that we asked for that information in discovery. I'm not sure it was provided though.
If I may just respond, I
Ms.
know
Norcutt.
in response to MCC 28, which we objected to and it was overruled, we did provide the rate base amount for the AMR meters. We did break it down for the AMI meters per meter cost. I don't see that the AMR is broken down per meter. We can keep looking though to see if it's in. I know we responded to discovery that was asked though.
So we will take that information as a post-hearing provision then.
Madam Chair, we actually have a smidge of information to recall Mr. Holden to answer Commissioner Bukachuk's questions. We're going to see if we can find that answer to put into the record.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, Mr. Brown's line of questioning earlier today, which I think was in keeping with my line of questioning yesterday, So I believe that you testified earlier this morning in response to one of Mr. Brown's questions that Northwestern Energy is seeking to recover the costs associated with the AMI meters and their installation in the current 2022 pending case, correct? And I think you just told me that too.
Yes,
Okay. So in a rate case such as the one that's pending before the commission, it's my understanding all of Northwest Energy's customers will be affected by the outcome of that case, correct?
yes,
So apply equally across the board to all Northwest Energy's customers, differentiating maybe rate classes.
differentiating rate classes and choice and non-choice.
Okay. And so customers that will or are choosing to opt out of receiving an AMI meter will be covered, if you will, by that rate case, correct?
Correct.
So is it a fair statement or characterization to say that customers who opt out of receiving an AMI meter will ultimately still pay for AMI meters through rates?
As Northwestern has presented its 2022 rate case, it would be that all customers would bear the cost of the AMI project, including opt-out customers.
You just testified including or opting out, correct?
Correct.
Is it also fair to say that Northwestern Energy will include the cost of the non-communicating meter and rate base?
I believe that is correct.
Would Northwestern Energy consider any portion of the one-time fee a customer contribution to capital in lieu of including the meter in the rate base, if you understand that question?
I do understand the question. It's outside of the scope of my testimony, and I'm not sure that I have an answer for you at this time.
Madam Chair, if I may direct a question to Northwestern Energy.
Of course, Mr. President.
Ms. Heim, did you tell me that in the commission that you're going to recall any witnesses?
Yes, we're going to recall Mr. Holden just for a little bit, but to clarify the record, I think that we have represented that we would only recover and rate base the delta between what we collect from an opt-out customer and our increased cost. I think that was.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Heim. All right, let's move on then. Is it a fair characterization to say that customers who opt out of receiving an AMI meter will ultimately still pay for their non-communicating meter through rates in addition to the one-time opt-out fee then?
To clarify, the and first, I'm not the rate base witness in the rate case, so this is my best guess. In the event the non-communicating meters are collected through the rate base, that this would result in all customers having to pay for the rate base associated with the non-communicating meters, and the opt-out customers would then pay the incremental charge associated with opt-out as proposed by Northwestern, which do not represent the full cost, which are reflected in Exhibit 5 of the Mr. Thurman's testimony. So
So
it'd be a portion.
So maybe, let me ask you this question. So you're familiar with the principle of utility rate making, that the cost causer should be the one that pays the cost, correct?
Yes.
And so am I to take from your answer that you do not believe that the alleged cost causer in this, let me back that question up. So in today's hearing, who do you believe is the cost causer then?
For AMI opt-outs.
Yes.
The cost causers would be for the customers. So costs associated with AMI opt-out, the cost causers would be the customers electing to opt out.
But it's your testimony based on my questions that the rate case would not capture the cost of who you believe is a cost causer in this scenario?
In the event that the non-communicating meters are captured in rate base in the rate case, it would not be reflected there, but we are asking that it be reflected here in determining the charges associated with opt-out.
Okay, one final question, Madam Chairman. It's my understanding that based on the 2022 rate case filing, that AMI meters would be included in rates as operating expenses, correct? Cost of reading?
I'm sorry, Ken.
Sure. So it's my understanding that based on the 2022 rate filing from Northwest Energy, you're familiar with that filing?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make it a more general question. Would the cost of reading AMI meters be included in rates as operating expenses?
The cost of the AMI project as a whole, those costs are included in the rate case. My expectation, I'm not the witness. I don't have the details. I do expect any costs associated with the so-called reading of AMI meters would be included in that.
So then that
Would be done through mesh technology rather than meter readers.
All right, sorry to talk over you, Ms. Fang. I apologize for that. So it's my understanding then that customers who opt out will be or would be paying the cost of reading AMI meters and rates, correct?
The Northwestern's AMI project is deploying a new base standard of service. So AMI opt-out customers would be responsible for their allocation of costs associated with that new service. Yes.
And in turn, I think we've established that the cost of reading their own non-communicating meter and the monthly would be also captured in the monthly fees, correct?
Yes, because, well, a portion of it. And that's because the availability of that option above and beyond the new standard of service would be incremental costs that we do expect them to pay some portion of.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Are there any other commissioner questions? Commissioner Bukacek, do you have any questions? Okay, my turn. Then. Oh, Ms. Fang.
Hello.
So I'm trying to understand how we got to this point of Northwestern presenting us this perspective that House Bill 606 actually captures the AMRs. Were you involved in reviewing that legislation when it was working its way through the legislative process in 2020?
I was not.
Do you know who was from the regulatory standpoint?
I don't know. I was not, so I'm not sure that I would know.
Okay. It seems that all three witnesses today presented by Northwestern started in 2021 with this project. So there's no institutional knowledge about things that happened prior to that. Are those people still at the agency or at the company, or is it a whole new staff in this area since 2021? People, decision makers.
I guess it's hard for me to answer since I wasn't in those conversations.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. I noticed that one thing that you indicated in your testimony concerning the price of these this opt-out option was, that by charging some fees, it would send a price signal to these customers so they would know there's some sort of cost associated with it. Is that what you meant by using the term price signal?
Can you point me to the reference?
It's on page 5 of your testimony, CSF 5 rebuttal testimony. And be on line 12.
Yes, I see it now. Mhm.
Okay.
Do you mind repeating your question?
Yes, can you tell me what you meant by price signal, sending a price signal to the customer?
Well, I think that's intended to capture to a certain degree the discussion about cost causer raised by President Brown, that there are costs associated with having that option available.
Do you think that informing customers that there would be a extra cost for opting out would be a deterrent to those customers from exercising that right to opt out?
In response to some of those concerns, because it is a concern, that is the reason that in looking at what would be a reasonable charge, we moderated that quite significantly when looking at the cost of those services relative to the charges we were looking to apply. So looking at the monthly charge, those costs were showing up as over $60, and we're looking at a $15 monthly fee for that. So we did take into consideration concerns about that being seen as a deterrent.
That would be the cost for having a new non-communicating meter, correct?
That was for the ongoing costs associated with meter reads and billing. Regarding the meter costs, the costs were over 110, and we were proposing a $70 to $75 charge.
Is it fair to say that the $75 opt-out fee that's proposed is also a price signal to the customers?
It is. And with that, in the event that we do have customers that are concerned about a one-time $75 payment, we would certainly work with those customers to figure out some sort of payment plan that would help address some of those concerns.
Do you expect that some customers will just decide not to opt out because of that fee?
I think Mr. Holden might have captured that best when he spoke earlier about some of the feelings regarding opt-outs, that at least my understanding of what he communicated is that most customers seeking to opt out, that these fees are not likely to represent a significant deterrence. And when we looked across the industry, we examined the opt-out fees of over 50 utilities. And with that, we made a point to look at what they were charging, and in selecting what, the appropriate charges for our proposal, we looked at something that was very middle of the road when looking at what other utilities had done as well.
Can that one-time opt-out fee be spread over several billing cycles?
I don't know exactly how some of our considerations, but I do expect that that would be an option.
There was a question asked earlier, I think it was Mr. Hamilton asked about the threshold of, can you speak to that at all in terms of the threshold of the number or the ratio of opt-outs that would not interfere with the system? I recall in an informational meeting, it was 5% was the target in South Dakota that Northwestern found was okay, and they didn't expect more than that here. Do you have any information about that at all, the threshold that would be allowable, or not disrupt the AMI mesh system?
The only thing I can add to that as far as the integrity of the mesh is most likely it's going to depend on the geographic density of customers in any given area. So if it's a more diverse customer, like if they're spread out farther, a few opt-outs can create probably greater challenges to the integrity of a mesh than if the same number of customers were to opt out in a more concentrated, a more densely concentrated area. I would not be the right person to speak to what percentage would be needed to ensure the integrity.
Okay. Before the AMI rollout, in the preliminary stages, I know you weren't involved before 2021, but at least that's what your testimony was, correct?
Correct.
Was Northwestern aware that there would be consumer concern about the AMIs prior to rolling out the AMI program in Montana?
I can't speak specifically to Northwestern prior to my joining the company. I am confident, though, that Northwestern, in its efforts to explore this option, would have recognized that that was an issue that's shown up in almost every jurisdiction that's implemented AMI, that there will be a customer segment seeking opt-out.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have, and we will go to Mr. Hamilton now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify language at the front here, in response to one of President Brown's questions, you referred to the so-called costs of reading AMI meters. I just want to make sure that I'm not using my terminology wrong here. Do you agree that there are costs associated with reading AMI meters?
I apologize for the confusion on that language. To me, when I think about the reading of AMI meters, it moves away from traditional meter readers to technology that does the reading. And so that was the reason for my qualifying language that was poorly chosen.
I understand. So the technology still has a cost.
Yes.
And that's the cost of reading.
Mm-hmm.
My air quotes don't get reflected in the transcript here, but that's the cost of reading the AMI meter.
Yes, that functionality with the transition to AMI is done differently,
okay,
but still needs to be done.
You mentioned in response to the chair's question about spreading out the fee over several billing cycles, and by the fee, I'm referring to the one-time opt-out fee. Is that discussed in the proposed tariff?
It is not.
Does it need to be?
I do not believe it needs to be. Northwestern is often engaging with its customers whenever there are times that customers express challenges with paying their bills. So I see that as sort of a normal course of action.
Okay. An earlier witness testified that having multiple different meters on Northwestern system would impose some problems. Do you know how many different type of meters are currently on Northwestern system?
I don't know. My understanding is that it's two, the AMRs and the AMIs. That's my understanding.
Were you here during earlier testimony that there are multiple types of AMR meters? Ones that, for example, bubble up
And
ones that don't?
Yes, and I'm not sure if that, like the distinction between that level of granularity.
Understood. In response to, again, some of the chair's questions about the mesh failing, as I understand it, based on prior testimony, and you can disagree with me here if you heard the testimony differently, the only way to read one of the AMI meters, if the mesh is not adequate, is to go out and physically look at the meter. Is that correct?
Can you say that one more time?
Sure. If for an AMI meter, the mesh is inadequate to relay the communication to Northwestern, you can't drive a truck by an AMI meter and get a read off of it. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
So for those customers who do not opt out, if their neighbors force a failure in the mesh, they will still have to self-read their meters. Is that correct?
I'm not really the right one to speak to that. I would say that that may be a likelihood in the event that there is a failure.
Fair enough. And the only point that I'm driving to here is Northwestern would not propose to charge a self-read fee to any of those folks who have an AMI meter, but for whatever reason still have to go out and read their own meter.
I think what you described is an extreme scenario rather than the typical situation for a self-read. So I don't think, I don't have an answer to that. That was the only qualifier I would add to that. You know, that seems like it's more not a normal course of business situation. And in the event that were to occur, I think Northwestern would have to think about what's the best approach, have conversations with the commission and see what actions need to be taken.
All right. We live in a fairly rural state, though. Is Northwestern concerned right now at this stage of the project that there will be areas so sparsely populated that this failure of the mesh could be a possibility?
I don't have specific knowledge about those conversations. I will say Northwestern, we know our service territory, and I'm sure there were discussions about how we would address those more rural areas and how to make sure that we would be able to maintain the integrity.
Okay. Okay. Last question about self-reading. On page 6 of your rebuttal testimony, if you have that in front of you. You refer on that page in a footnote to electric tariff rule number 10 at 10-1. Do you see that footnote in there?
I do see the footnote, though I don't have the tariff in front of me.
I anticipate that would be your response, and that's fine. Would you agree with me, maybe subject to check, as we often like to do here in commission proceedings, that rule does contemplate that Northwestern would read a customer meter less frequently than once a month?
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. Let me phrase it this way then. Why is it important from Northwestern's perspective that all customers who opt out of the AMI program read their meters at least monthly?
My preference would be to read the tariff before answering. Is that a possibility?
Well, I certainly don't want to put you on the spot to answer something that you don't have in front of you. So let's pretend that the tariff doesn't matter. From Northwestern's perspective, as it applies to the AMI opt-out program, why is it important that those customers provide a meter read to you at least once a month?
Well, when I think about billing our customers, you know, the the standard and what our customers are used to is basically being billed the equivalent of once a month. You know, billing cycles aren't exactly spot on as far as the days of the month. But with that being the regular practice, I think that it's important for us to have the information in order to continue billing consistently that way. When you start to have lapses between those periods and you start to accumulate those days, what customers will see will be bill volatility associated with the days being captured, not necessarily differences in usage or prices. And so I think it can create a very complicated customer experience if sometimes we get a monthly read, sometimes it's every other month, sometimes it's every 3 months, you know, and a customer may find themselves in a situation where they did not anticipate the bill and didn't understand the consequences that might come from a self-read. Otherwise, the other option is, you know, bill estimates, which can be not the best, you know, especially considering the changes in weather that we see.
I appreciate that answer, but you say that estimates are not the best. You would agree, though, that Northwestern has a budget billing program that effectively estimates a customer's bill?
Well, the budget billing process and John Thurman might actually be the best person to answer that, but my understanding of the budget billing process is it's an averaging. It doesn't obviate the need to still do the monthly reads.
Okay. Thank you. I think that answers all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Would the Montana Consumer Council like to recross?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Fang, do you recall discussing with Commissioner O'Donnell the deployment schedule for the AMI rollout?
The deployment or the deployment schedule?
Deployment schedule.
And I'm going to apologize if I'm incorrect, but I don't recall deployment schedule. I do recall discussing deployments.
Okay. Well, I think there's been quite a bit of discussion about kind of where we are in the rollout. So my question is just, when does Northwestern expect to deploy the AMI smart meters in the most rural areas of the state?
I would not be the right person to answer that. I believe John Thurman might be a better person to answer that question. Oh, Matt Holden, actually.
Okay, I'll ask him, since he's being called. Okay, and then just to follow up on this discussion of the cost of the existing AMR meters, could you refer to MCC 28A, please?
I need just a minute. MCC 28,
Yes.
I have it.
Okay, and specifically 28A, which for the record was a following up on MCC 4A, both of which asked about the remaining plant and service associated with existing AMR meters. Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you see that in the response, Northwestern provided a total aggregate amount in depreciated value for AMR meters as of December 31st, 2021?
I do see that number.
And that the response goes on to say that Northwestern's not providing the dollar amount for plant and service through August 2022, as this value will not be determined until the end of 2022. Would that value be available now?
I don't have the answer to that question.
Okay, well,
Looking at this response, I'm not the witness identified in this.
right. But I guess I'm just asking whether Northwestern could still provide the plant in service amount through, say, the end of 22 at this point as a post-hearing provide.
I don't have the answer to that as far as a definitive if we have it right now.
Do you know why Northwestern didn't supplement the response to this data request?
It might be because we don't have it yet.
So you don't know.
I don't know.
Well, I guess, Madam Chair, just since there's been some interest expressed on the part of commissioners in the cost of the existing AMR meters, and this question goes to that and was never updated, I guess I would ask whether there could be a post-hearing provide that provides the plant in service through the end of 2022.
Madam Chair, we would actually object to that because it's completely beyond the scope of this docket, and it actually doesn't answer the question that was asked in discovery. We provided that as a benchmark, but it far exceeds what was asked then or what should be asked in post-hearing briefing. That what is in rate base today and at the end of 2022 is more properly addressed in the ongoing rate.
The objection is overruled and we will take that issue up as a post-hearing provide.
With that, Madam Chair, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any objections to Northwestern recalling a witness?
We'd like to
Oh.
redirect.
Excuse me, yes. I guess I'm trying to keep us moving along, so. Your witness, Northwestern.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's go start at the beginning of the questioning that you had received. So Mr. O'Donnell or Commissioner O'Donnell, so graciously or not, labeled you as an attorney, but will you just take a minute and provide your background and what you actually do at Northwestern?
My role at Northwestern is VP of Regulatory Affairs. Prior to that, I was Director of Regulatory Affairs for Montana. I oversee the regulatory activities before the Montana PSC, and now as Vice President, also with the South Dakota and Nebraska commissions. Prior to joining Northwestern, I held a variety of positions at San Diego Gas and Electric. Most of that time was spent overseeing their electric rate strategy. In addition, spent some time overseeing their forecasting as well as load research efforts. My background's not being an attorney, I'm actually an economist. So I have a bachelor's degree in political economics of natural resources and completed all the work, coursework, but not the dissertation associated with a doctorate degree in applied economics.
Thank you. So I think there's an open issue of what happens for customers if the commission orders Northwestern to allow customers to retain their AMR meter. And when that meter fails, what happens? This wasn't part of Northwestern's proposal, but I think it's been raised enough that we should answer that question.
So Northwestern's proposal is in the context of moving from AMR as the standard meter to AMI as the standard metering offering for all of our customers. In developing the opt-out proposal, Northwestern included a non-communicating digital meter as an additional option available to customers with the expectation that AMR would no longer be available at some point in time, that customers would gradually transition to either AMI or this non-communicating digital meter. With the discussion today, the commission has made very strong indications that the ability to retain an AMR meter is an important option we should maintain for our customers. I think an open question to that is, in the event Northwestern does retain or does include an ability for customers to retain that AMR meter, what is that transition as the life of those meters then begin to expire? So when that AMR meter expires, is the expectation then that AMR meters will be an ongoing option that Northwestern must then make available for its customers after the life of the existing AMR meters that are out there? Or will there be the ability to transition as those AMR meters expire to be either AMI or non-communicating digital? So I think that continues to be an open question. And then what happens to the costs associated with that ongoing maintenance of a third option, metering option for our customers?
Okay. There was a lot of discussion about, from Commissioner O'Donnell in particular, about medical concerns. Are you familiar? I believe you included in your testimony a survey of AMI opt-out programs in other states.
Correct.
Are you aware of any other utility or any other state requiring AMI technology to be withdrawn after it's been deployed?
I am not aware of any utility or jurisdiction that has withdrawn or excluded the deployment of AMI due to health concerns.
One issue of clarity, you had talked with President Brown about the replacement of gas meters. Is it your understanding that the entire gas meter is being replaced or only the module within gas meter?
If I correctly, I believe the difference in the pricing of the gas meter versus the electric meter is that it is just a module replacement on gas.
Ms. Fang, is Northwestern proposing fees? And when you did the work to moderate the fees from our actual costs, was your purpose or the company's purpose to deter opt-out?
No.
Is it fair to say, in the event that the mesh fails due to opt-out or AMR retention, if that's ordered, that failure would be a utility problem to remedy? In other words, if there's a failure of a utility technology, like the mesh system, is it not our problem to solve, not the AMI customer's problem to solve?
Well, it'll be the utility's problem to solve. It will be a problem that impacts our customers.
Okay. That's all I have right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fang, you are temporarily excused then. And now we will see if there are any objections to recalling a witness before we go to the MCC's case in chief.
No objection.
Northwestern?
Great, thank you. Northwestern would recall Matthew Holden. Thank you for batting a little bit of cleanup, Mr. Holden.
My pleasure.
So let's first address the issue, the question that had been asked earlier of Commissioner Bukacek. Do you have the megahertz reading for an AMR meter? Or I'm sorry, it was the non-communicating digital meter.
Yes, ma'am. So in looking at the material specifications of it's a Centron meter that Itron manufactures. It is a non-communicating meter, but operates at 60 hertz. And so that is the operating basically based upon the voltage, 120 or 240, it operates at 60 hertz. I believe that is what she was looking for.
And is that consistent with an analog meter?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that meter emit any RF radiation?
Based upon the specifications that Itron shows throughout the document, it does not communicate any RF.
Okay, the next item was President Brown had asked how much an AMR meter would cost to replace. Did you find that information?
I did. And so I will caveat this, President Brown. What we have is a rolling average in our system of what these meters cost over the course of several years from purchasing from Itron. They fluctuate from $40 to what I appear to see is right now $108. So the rolling average is approximately $74 to replace an AMR, or for the meter itself, an AMR. And this is a typical residential, we call Form 2S residential class meter.
Okay, and I believe the Consumer Council had a question for you on deployment, but I will ask his own question.
Please.
Thank you, Ms. Heim, Madam Chair. Yes, Ms. Fang, I believe referred this to you. Do you know what the current schedule is for deployment of the AMI meters in the most rural parts of the state?
I do have an understanding of what that deployment timeframe looks like. Yes, sir.
And what is that?
Well, currently we are deploying AMI technology as we look at the availability of that mesh communication. As we deploy, we look at how well is it performing. But we have identified specific areas that is extremely rural that we are going to wait until what we're considering phase 2 of the project will be mid 2025 before we start addressing those customers in our considered most rural areas.
Okay, and so if that begins in approximately 2025, do you know when that would be complete and the last AMI meter in the most rural part of the state will have been deployed?
I don't have that answer. To be honest, I'm not sure. We will have to wait and to see after we've deployed our AMI technology throughout all of the divisions to see what that coverage looks like in some of these, what we're considering more rural areas. So upon that determination, then we'll be able to determine how long it's going to take and what, from a time frame perspective, what we're going to have to do to get that technology put in.
Okay. And in the meantime, those folks in the most rural parts of the state will continue to be serviced through an AMR meter?
That is correct.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Further questions from commissioners? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. Just a quick question. It seems to me, I know the answer to this, but the AMI meter has a digital display, so a customer could read their own reading on there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In all my 52 years of being a rate paying customer, I've never checked my meter, but it's nice to know that it's available.
It is available. Yes, sir. And to be honest, what's impressive to me as a customer is our customers are calling, asking to understand what their display means. So they are trying to be as informed as possible as far as what that display looks like and what they're using. And it's encouraging so that they're an educated consumer.
Thank you.
Okay, there being no further, do you have questions, Mr. Hamilton? No, okay. So thank you for coming back, Mr. Holden, and you are temporarily excused then.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, does Northwestern have any further witnesses?
No, ma'am, I am happy to report that is the end of Northwestern's case in chief.
Thank you. What is the pleasure of the commission? Do we need a little break or should we move into the case in chief? We'll take a 10-minute break. It is 2:05. We will come back at 2:15. We are now off the record. We are now back on the record. The time is 2:17 PM and we will now resume the hearing. Mr. Brown, you may proceed with your case in chief.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Good afternoon. I'll begin with a brief opening statement. From my perspective, this case is all about options. And I don't think there are standard and non-standard options here. I think there are just options that have been created by the legislature and this commission. I think the proposal in this case is really out of step with the legislative intent and the commission's rule that was adopted and the timing of the AMI rollout. Northwestern's attempting to force customers into only two options, both of which would require a new meter. And that might be great for growing rate base, but it does not appear to be the most cost-effective approach. And it doesn't appear that the company even knows what the most cost-effective approach is if you consider keeping your existing meter to be one of the options. Our position is that customers who opt out should be allowed to keep their existing meter as an option. And that forcing everyone to pay for a new meter, whether they need one or not, is not required under the law. So let's talk about the law briefly. First of all, I would submit that the definition doesn't matter here. Regardless of whether the existing AMR meters meet the definition of advanced metering or not, customers should be allowed to keep the existing meter as an option. Obviously, the non-communicating digital meter will satisfy the definition if that is one of the options. But there's nothing that says there only has to be two options. There could be those two options and an option to keep the existing meter, regardless of whether it meets that definition or not. I think the key legal provision in the statute is in 69.4/1004, subpart 3, which states if the commission determines an opt-out program should be established, the commission shall adopt rules providing options and requirements for individual customers to opt out. So right there, the commission has the authority under statute to adopt rules providing options here. And the commission did that. And in the rules that the commission adopted, consumers are given the option to either remove an AMI device and replace it with an alternative meter approved by the commission, or to decline installation of an advanced metering device and retain the existing meter. So right there, the commission had statutory authority to define the options through rules and adopted a rule giving consumers the option of keeping or retaining the existing meter. I would agree that the law allows the commission to set fees, but it doesn't require that. It's entirely within this commission's discretion what the options are and for opting out, whether there would be fees at all. I am here to urge the commission to use that discretion to preserve all viable and cost-effective options here for consumers who wish to opt out and decline to set any fees at this time for opting out. Let's talk a little about the evidence here. Because when it adopted the rules, the commission said that it expected utilities requesting opt-out fees to provide credible evidence of the actual costs they will incur in serving customers who opt out. And I think the testimony of Dr. Dismukes shows that Northwestern has not provided credible evidence in this case. What the evidence does show is that the majority of the AMR meters have not reached the end of their useful life. Opt-out rates are likely to be low. Less than 1% is what we've heard will opt out. And so Dr. Dismukes estimates that total annual opt-out costs could range from $1.9 to $2.3 million. And it's our position that even if even a portion of the company's estimated benefits and efficiencies materialize from this project, those efficiency benefits are likely enough to cover the costs of the small number of customers that will participate in the AMO tariff. And I think we've heard over the last day or so why the company's cost estimates are not credible. And there's a number of reasons for that, and I won't go into all of them. But we don't know the actual opt-out rates yet. we don't know the actual costs yet. What you see in this case is a number of questionable assumptions made. For example, they're proposing to read the opt-out customers' meters on a regular monthly basis, but to use electric servicemen to do that who will only read the meters outside of the normal cycle of reading meters. Instead of using the existing meter reading wage of $35.50 an hour, the company's using $64.23 as the hourly wage for the electric servicemen who will now begin to do this job instead. It claims that it can't dedicate meter readers to rural areas exclusively, and yet it currently relies on part-time meter readers to read meters in rural areas. So I don't think it's been explained why the company couldn't continue to use lower cost part-time meter readers to read meters in rural areas, perhaps quarterly instead of monthly. I'm not sure you've heard a good explanation why that couldn't be done to bring down the cost of this. And then today we heard too that they split the difference between the cost of the electric and gas meters to come up with that fee. So I just think there's a number of small examples where the assumptions being made are pretty questionable. And I don't think the burden has been met here to show that these estimates are accurate or appropriate. And I think the context is important. And that is that the commission has never approved recovery of the smart meter costs on a final basis. It is only now reviewing those investments in the rate case. And given the partial state of the rollout and the low rates of opting out, I would submit that Northwestern has not shown there's a problem here to solve today. Of course, it is in the company's financial interest to replace all of the meters, whether they're at the end of their useful life or not, because Northwestern will expect to earn a return on investment in the new meters, whether they're AMI or new non-communicating digital meters. So I appreciate the commission looking closely at this case, and our recommendation is that you should find Northwestern has not met its burden of proof to support any opt-out fees at this time. I would add, I think you should reject the eligibility criteria. We haven't talked a lot about that, but this idea that the company will be judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to threats of violence, determining what constitutes a threat of violence, which customers are on good behavior and which ones have not been on the best behavior. I think those are pretty subjective calls, and it makes me uncomfortable that consumers might be denied their right to opt out because of a subjective judgment call on the part of the company in terms of who's eligible. So I hope the commission will reject those eligibility criteria because I'm not sure they've really been thought through here. And so for now, our proposal is to treat these opt-out costs as another cost to providing this AMI service. And so we recommend not imposing any opt-out fees until the Montana meter upgrade project is complete and actual cost information is available. So with that, Madam Chair, I would call Dr. David Dismukes.
Dr. Dismukes, and if you'd like, you're welcome to remove that visitor tag. Just as long as you don't intend to wander the back halls, I don't think you'll need it. Dr. Dismukes, you were sworn in yesterday, correct?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
Okay, Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Dr. Dismukes, would you please state your name for the record?
David P. Dismukes.
By whom are you employed?
I'm a consulting economist with the Acadian Consulting Group.
And what's your job title at the Acadian Consulting Group?
I'm a consulting economist. I'm the managing partner.
And did you file testimony in this case?
Yes, sir, I did.
Placed before you is an exhibit that I've marked as MCC 1. Do you recognize that? Do you have a copy of your testimony?
I have a
Dr.
copy of my
Dismukes?
testimony. Yes, sir.
And we've marked that as exhibit MCC 1. Is that a true and correct copy of your pre-filed testimony?
Yes, sir, it is.
And if I were to ask you the same questions today under oath, would your answers be the same?
They would, with the exception of, I think I'll change my job title too. I am now Professor Emeritus at the LSU Center for Energy Studies. I retired on January the 15th.
Not a vice president?
not a vice president.
So sounds like you don't have any changes or corrections to make.
No substantive.
Okay, with that, I would move for the admission of exhibit MCC one, Madam Chair.
No objection.
Okay, MCC one is admitted.
Dr. Dismukes is available for cross-examination.
Northwestern, your witness.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Dismukes.
you.
What do you believe is the purpose of an opt-out program?
The purpose in Montana for the opt-out program is to give customers choices between whether they would like to participate in the company's AMI program or not.
Do you consider advanced meters to be an industry standard technology?
I believe they are becoming one, yes.
Well, isn't it true, sir, that as early as 2007, you consulted in Louisiana and supported AMI deployment?
Well, I wouldn't say I supported it. I wrote the rules for the Louisiana Commission and told them the guidelines by which utilities, I didn't take a position on any proposals because we didn't have any proposals at that time. I simply wrote the rules for the commission that set the guidelines by which utilities would be evaluated.
Mhm. Well, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but when I read the testimony in a particular docket from 2007, this was the Entergy AMI metering pilot.
Right.
You consulted with staff on this docket, correct?
Correct.
And ultimately, you and staff wrote the report in this docket.
Yes,
And that report recommended the AMI pilot go forward.
I did. Yes, that's great. I'm sorry, I confused the rulemaking in that docket. Those were two separate proceedings.
Is it fair to say that your most significant concern about Northwestern's plan is the projected costs offered by Mr. Thurman?
No. No, my most significant concern with the program is that the customers can't keep their existing meters.
Could you please repeat that? I couldn't hear what you
I
just
said
said.
my most significant concern is that customers can't keep their own meters. I do have concerns about the cost, but I think if I had to isolate the most important one in this proceeding, it has to do with the choice that I think is clear in both the statute and the commission's rules that allow these customers to keep their existing meters.
Do you dispute that Northwestern's proposed fees reflect industry standard?
I would say the fees do appear to be in line with some of the ones that were surveyed by Ms. Fang and the ones that I've reviewed as well. Yes.
Correct. So in fact, your analysis suggests that the average monthly opt-out fee is $25.41.
Correct.
And Northwestern's proposed fee is actually substantially less at $15 a month. Correct?
That's correct.
Let's talk a little bit about allocation of costs. You recommend that the commission impose no upfront fees, correct?
Yes, correct.
And your testimony suggests that a high of $2.3 million a year in opt-out costs could occur, correct?
Yes, that's true based on the company's estimates. If you just extrapolated those out and looked at what those total, kind of that total potential liability or bookend would be, it's somewhere around 2.3.
Okay. So could those costs go higher if the commission orders Northwestern to allow customers to retain their AMR meter?
I have not estimated those. I don't know why they would go higher than that if you get to keep your own meter.
So your recommendation, Dr. Dismukes, is that that Northwestern spread the costs out to all customers rather than allocate it to those who caused it, correct?
No, that's not my testimony at all. I think that question presumes that somehow or another, these opt-out customers are the cost causers in this, and I would disagree with that premise.
Well, you had testified that there will be up to $2.3 million a year in opt-out costs. You already acknowledged that. So where do those costs get allocated? Either to the opt-out customer or to all customers, correct?
So let's clarify something. 2.3 million is the overall book-in cost based on the company's estimates. It's the exposed liability potentially that could be out there based on the company's own estimates. I don't know that that is the true cost or not. And I would argue it's likely something substantially less than that. Secondly, the presumption of your question again is on cost causality and the presumption that somehow or another, these opt-out customers created this cost. This is a cost that was created by Northwestern. Northwestern is the one who has made and proposed the AMI proposal. It is the one who has made and offered this modernization proposal. It's not the opt-out customer's decision. They have created this cost. But for this decision to move forward with AMI, we wouldn't be here today, and this wouldn't be a problem for those opt-out customers. So they are not the cost causers in this. The cost causers in this are going to be Northwestern and the customers that will benefit from participating in AMI, not these other customers that are non-participating customers that are being assessed extra fees as opposed to just continuing with their own meters and paying the fees that they pay already.
Although, isn't it true that your testimony includes analysis of substantial utility usage of an opt-out fee?
There are utilities that have opt-out fees, but I haven't been asked to go in and look at each and one of those in terms of what the reasonableness of those are. I have been asked to look at the reasonableness of the costs that are backing up the ones in this proceeding, and they're unreasonable, as I noted in my testimony. And just the way that the company is proposing to recover these is unreasonable with traditional rate making practices. I mean, right now you're asking for meter fee cost in theory based on these fees that would not amortize the cost of the asset over its useful life, even though you're getting a new meter.
Okay.
So no new customer would actually get the opportunity. No new customer today or in the past would ever pay the full amount of their meter at the time that they got new service. And yet that's what the company is proposing their fees be based on, is a presumption that all these costs be recovered in 1 year.
Consistent with all of the other utilities that you surveyed in your testimony.
I don't
correct?
know that that's true and that those costs were included in those fees and part of that. Those fees may have coincidentally been the same, and they benchmark comparable to them. But I don't know that those costs were that way. And I don't know that those commissions ruled that way, because if they did it, they would. Yeah, I don't know that they ruled that way, because if they did, that would be inconsistent with most normal rate making practices.
Mhm. All right, let's talk about the self-read option. You advocate eliminating the customer read option, correct?
Correct.
So the only option would be for the utility to read customers' meters, correct?
Correct.
And yet you advocate that no fee be charged for this service, even though it generates costs for all customers, including those who did not opt out.
Correct. I mean, the utility could advise these customers about levelized billing and ask those customers and inform them about the costs associated with that. Those could be done on a less frequent basis than a monthly basis. There are other utilities that do that. I think there are other options out there than going out and reading the meter every month.
You worked in the utility industry a long time, Dr. Dismukes. Wouldn't you say that the choice of infrastructure like meters lies ultimately with the utility?
Yes, I would.
You,
Well, let me caveat that. Yes, I would, subject to the approval of their commissions.
you propose to allow customers to retain their existing meter though, correct?
Yes.
Are you really suggesting in your testimony that allowing customers' meters to fail serves the public interest?
I don't think I said that anywhere in my testimony. My testimony is that the legislative intent of HB 606 and this commission was to allow these customers to keep their meters. And there is nothing in my testimony that suggests, and I think there's a presumption in your question, that somehow or another, if you get to keep your meter, that I or the MCC, or I don't know, maybe it's an assumption that you all are making, that you would stop conducting your normal maintenance and survey work associated with these meters on a forward-going basis and continue to monitor the replacement of those like you would as though nothing happened.
Sir, in your experience, do utilities go out and regularly service residential meters that are not failing?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. So my question though, is that just following your testimony to its logical conclusion, that if we allow customers to retain their AMR meters, they will eventually fail, correct?
Everything has a useful life. Every utility asset has a useful life and will ultimately, if not maintained, fail.
So your recommendation to the commission, though, is that Northwestern allow those AMR meters to stay in the field until they fail.
They need to stay in the field, and the company needs to continue to maintain its consistent meter maintenance practices like it would as though nothing changed. I don't understand why the maintenance practices would need to change as a result of this opt-out program. And what you're presuming is you're just going to ignore these customers, cut them out to dry, and just say, when your meter fails, we'll come back and fix it. We'll fix it.
Not at all, sir. Not at all.
Well, that's what your question presumes.
Well, it's interesting because I've spent a lot of time reading your testimony over the last weeks on a variety of topics. And I have yet to see any testimony that you've offered or any of your academic writing. There's 75 pages of sites where you advocate allowing utility infrastructure to fail in place. And so I am struggling to reconcile all of your advocacy with your recommendation in this docket.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, is there a question there?
Yeah, how about the page and the line number where I said that?
Hold on.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Just one at a time.
Madam Chair, I just asked the council be instructed to ask questions in the form of a question.
I wilted at the end of the sentence. It's a question.
I concur, and I'd like to see this conversation toned down a little bit on both parts, please. Let's slow down and be methodical about our questions and answers, please.
Yeah, again, to reiterate, my testimony is that customers should be able to retain their meters. And I'm not suggesting that the company in any way should let those operate until failure. As I mentioned before, they should continue to maintain their current maintenance practices with the meters for the advanced meters, just like they would with the AMRs. I don't understand why that should change.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Madam Chair, that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of this witness from the commission? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. I agree with counsel who referenced your 75 pages of sites. That's incredibly impressive.
Thank you.
If ever there was an expert witness in front of us, I think that qualifies you to be an expert witness. So the issue here is opting out and the costs relative to that. Are you familiar with any other state that, any other jurisdiction that has had a similar question in front of them that you have, you've been involved with?
Well, all states have had to deal with this problem, as council mentioned, going back to probably 2008 when these issues first started arising. Dealing with opt-out customers and how to make this transition has always been a public policy issue, and ultimately, it's up to the individual states, their legislatures, and their commissions to define what that policy is and what the intent of that policy is.
When you did the rulemaking, as was pointed out with the Louisiana Commission, did the issue of opt-out ever arise during that? Was it addressed at all?
So at my time in dealing with the issue, it did not arise. We were really discussing cost recovery issues and how those would be evaluated, and whether or not an intermediate cost recovery or periodic cost recovery mechanism could be used, like a tracker mechanism, and what the terms and conditions would be should a utility opt in to promote AMI and to use a tracker mechanism.
What year was that, by the way?
It's about 07, 08, some time ago.
Oh, basically the infancy of AMI.
It was in the early days. I mean, AMI, I think, started probably in the mid 2000s. The Energy Policy Act was passed in 2005 that encouraged states to look at adopting AMI. As I'm sure you probably recall, in 08 and 09 during the American Recovery and Restoration Act, the ARRA, during the Obama administration, there was a lot of funding that was made available for smart metering for utilities during that time period. And so that was about the time period that you started seeing a lot of ramp up in these areas.
Thank you. On page, nothing at the bottom of the page 6 of 20 of your testimony, you refer, well, continuing on from the other side, say HB 606 requires the commission must use criteria, including, and the fourth one, other concerns related to advanced metering devices and advanced metering gateway devices. Do you feel that the testimony you've heard today or read indicates that the company has addressed the legitimate deep felt concerns of customers relative to protecting their health?
You know, I don't have an opinion on that. I think to me, what's most important, as I mentioned before, is that customers have options. And it doesn't matter what the reasons is, privacy, health, other factors, they need to have the ability to exercise choice. And one of those choices should include maintaining. And whatever reasons that they choose for doing that is up to those individuals. And I trust that most individuals, as an economist, will make decisions that are in their best interest, and that those customers that opt out are doing so because it is in their best interest.
Based upon your experience, if a customer has deep felt concerns, and I understand that health concerns to this point have not necessarily been proven to be caused by smart meters or anything of that nature. So it's anecdotal. Okay, I understand that. Nevertheless, we're talking about customer experience, customer enhancement. If somebody truly believes that having a meter on their house, being exposed to that, is a danger to their health, it would seem to me, and I just wondered what your experience would be on this, to be a fairness issue to not have them pay money to somebody in order to protect their health from being invaded. Does that make it?
So that would give me concerns if there are genuine health and safety issues that a customer would have, and they feel like they would like to make a choice that's consistent with their best interest regarding those concerns, and yet they have to pay a fee to do that, and how some might be priced out of the market and may not be able to exercise that choice because there's a price there. I would not agree that prices aren't important for households. The first law of demand in economics is that as the price of something goes down, you buy more of it, and the price goes up, you buy less of it. And so in this instance, if you have a price and it goes up, you're going to have an issue associated with how essentially people will choose to make decisions for this opt-out tariff. Now, that price flexibility may be very tight. I wouldn't disagree with that, but I don't think that prices would be insignificant. And there are, in my experience, particularly for lower, in some instances, lower moderate income households, where that could be a tough choice for some people.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Pinocci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we take a look at some reasons all these power companies want to move to smart meters. I think we've established that they'd have less meter readers. I think we've established that they don't have to send somebody out to plug in a meter or disconnect one. They can do it automatically, saving probably hundreds of jobs, if not thousands across the country. But I think there's other savings. What other savings do you see that we haven't talked about moving to a smart meter? Can you think of any?
Well, I mean, there's clearly the operational savings that are created as a consequence of adopting these quote unquote smart meters or the AMI meters. Some of the things that you heard earlier in terms of automated connect, disconnect, remote meter reading, increased billing accuracy, reporting outage information, outage information, variety of other things that are out there within the space that I think I would categorize as utility savings and operational savings that they could garner as a consequence of this. In many instances, those can be passed and should be passed along, and usually are passed along to customers through base rates when you get lower O&M costs and other metering costs that are avoided as a consequence of using essentially these advanced technologies. And there are also another set of benefits, and it gets back to the rule that Ms. Heim was talking about earlier that I wrote in Louisiana. And one of the prerequisites in Louisiana in order to adopt AMI is that you have to adopt concurrently with the AMI rule programs that help customers save money by adopting these technologies. So there's a wide variety of demand response and pricing mechanisms that customers and tariffs that they can take advantage of by utilizing these AMI technologies, such as critical peak pricing, time of use pricing, real-time pricing where they can get a better grasp of essentially their bills. They can see when the cost of electricity is high. They can pay differentiated rates based on the marginal cost of electricity in those particular hours. There are some classes of customers out there that would like to have that functionality. And it creates better energy efficiency. It creates opportunities for reduced natural resource use. It creates, opportunities for all of society, not just those participants, but for all of us.
So there's a lot of savings that we haven't talked about today. A down power line, for instance, 20 years ago, when a power line was down, the power company would say, hey, we're going out to fix it. You didn't happen to see where it was down. With the smart meter technology, we're able to pinpoint right where the outage is, and they can start looking there, saving hours and hours of time. But we haven't talked about forecasting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a minute. We check a meter once a month. We heard testimony today, they want to get a reading 3 times a day.
Right.
I think this might have something to do with if we're going to offload power because we have too much, or we need to buy power because we have too much. To be able to have 3 meter readings a day could save millions in forecasting. To know when I need to buy and when I need to sell. Has that ever come up when you have these meetings all over the country, that's a tremendous savings because of the accuracy of forecasting almost to the minute, where they were depending on a bill once a month?
Yeah, so it's a good observation. I think if you look in the industry right now, there's these areas where we have what it was referred to as big data development, where people are examining micro detailed data that's coming from a variety of different customer accounts. And a lot of this on a foregoing basis can come from these advanced meters that are being put into place. And as you heard earlier, those meters can be read at intervals that the utility can define. There's a lot of flexibility. Northwestern has said 3, but if they had issues where they wanted to change that scalability, it's my understanding they can. There are obviously data storage and data collection and management issues in terms of how you make that decision on those. But yeah, you can do lots of customized in-use studies and really get into fine differentiation on how to price services, how to predict loads, how to predict the location of loads, how loads are changing with micro changes in weather in particular areas, how to dispatch distributed resources, how to use the distribution system, much like we use the bulk power system in terms of standalone behind the meter generation. I think at the end of the day, from your questioning earlier and what you're asking me today, is there are big efficiency opportunities across a wide spectrum of different activities in this business.
I think what's important is to identify the savings so that we can understand that maybe there should be some sort of benefit to the ratepayer they're not currently getting. So the next point, and you kind of touched on it, transmission decisions. If I know a big load is coming or I have a decrease in load, I might decide to do my transmission lines a little different, right? Switching power from one transmission line to another. To be able to have forecasting to the minute, to the day, 3 times a day compared to once a month. If all of you were my bosses and I worked at the power company and I bought energy that we didn't need and spent millions on it, you're going to chew me out and say you made a bad call. If I have 3 meter readings a day, I'm going to be able to make a much better assessment on what I need, could save the company millions. So in your travels, why in the world wouldn't the power company just simply say, if you guys move to the smart meter technology, we're not charging anything? After all, we're going to save millions. And it isn't just getting rid of the jobs of the meter reader. It's not just getting rid of the jobs of the guy that goes out and disconnects the meter. We're talking about decisions on forecasting to be more accurate, decisions on how we move transmission down the lines because we have up to the minute forecasting. How come that hasn't come up to say, wow, we're going to put in all these meters for nothing. In fact, we'll put them all in and decrease your bill maybe over time after we recover some of the costs of the expense of putting it in, right? Hasn't that come up in a meeting?
Well, it should come into the decisions that are made in rate cases when these investments are put into place. And it's usually my experience that cost benefit analyses are done on these investments, and you look at essentially the overall, because you're leveraging capital investments up front, and you're comparing those to the benefits, and you're hoping that those benefits outweigh those capital costs, and that you can monetize those, and you can calculate a net benefit for ratepayers from having made that investment. You know, utilities take risks though in doing that, and they need to put a lot of capital in place in order to leverage those potential savings that come down the line. And so they usually would like to get cost recovery and a rate of return on those assets as a result of that.
We had testimony just not too long ago where I asked the question, certainly there's a savings. And we heard an answer that, well, the cost is pretty high to do this. And I said, well, why would you do it at all? Or is the cost actually higher to move to the smart meter and going to cost everybody more? And if that's the case, why wouldn't we stay to the meter we have, right? To that, would your answer be that moving to the smart meter absolutely guarantees a lower cost and a bigger profit margin to the power company all the time, or we wouldn't see such a push to do this across the country?
So I can't testify to Northwestern's experience. Whatever their motivations are for doing AMI are their motivations, and they'll have to defend that in the rate case. What I will say in terms of looking at this from a broader industry perspective is it's usually the case that utilities make these arguments because the benefits outweigh the cost.
Was it fair to say that a utility might say, wow, I know we're going to save money, we're going to be more streamlined, we're going to make better decisions, we're going to be more profitable. Shouldn't we try to get the ratepayer to pay as much of the cost as we could? Is that a fair assessment that that could be what happens across the country? And they'll say, if we get away with it, you know, we can get the consumer to cover some of this cost. Do you think that's a fair concern with your travels across the country?
You know, I'll just defer to individual states that have evaluated this, approved the adoptions, and put them into rates. The fact that they've done that would suggest that those commissions have, in those particular instances, found the benefits greater than the cost, that they're net benefits, and allowed them into rates and found them used and useful and prudent and justified.
Have you ever seen a state say, hey, we'll put in the smart meter and not charge the customer anything because we're going to save money and it'll be better for the whole company? Or is every single utility charging the ratepayer, trying to charge them some portion of it?
Yeah, I have never seen a rollout that didn't have costs that were recovered from ratepayers. Some of those costs have been offset in some examples, as I mentioned before, after 2008 and 2009 with federal grant dollars. But by and large, most of those have been paid for by ratepayers. And I would argue that even the ones that have been supported financially from federal grants and credits ultimately are being paid by ratepayers. It's just the ratepayers of the entire country as opposed to those in the individual service territory. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
In your
I teach in my class.
Okay. In your experiences, any power company lost money in which they'd went back to the old analog meter after making the decision, or they all felt that was a good decision and the company moved forward and were more profitable? I
haven't done a survey. It wouldn't surprise me that there's a handful out there that have had bad experiences with them, but I think by and large, just given the breadth of the deployment that we've seen to date, the result has probably been more positive than negative. I think the only thing in this proceeding, though, that I think is most important is that, you know, somehow or another, Northwestern, and I'll let them make their case in terms of justifying their AMI investment, they've made that decision, and there have obviously benefits associated with that they feel are justified, but they made that decision. And I would argue relative to this proceeding that they are the cost causers in terms of wanting to move to this new paradigm and adopting this new infrastructure platform. And the cost of these opt-out customers are a cost of moving forward with that new paradigm. These are not costs that these customers incurred or created by themselves. And so they're the one, so they shouldn't be saddled with these individual charges that the company is proposing here just because of an infrastructure deployment decision that obviously should be better off, or else it would seem to me that nobody would make a proposal like that before their regulators if they couldn't justify those with benefits. And so my testimony has been, you should disregard these fees. These customers didn't create those costs. These costs are still at this point a little uncertain. They are certainly a small fraction of the potential benefits that you've already recognized and talked about. this is a cost of moving forward with AMI and moving technology forward. Let's waive these fees, move technology forward, and create essentially a win-win situation for everybody. You know, in economics, we have outcomes when we're looking at public policy issues. And when we talk about an optimal public policy outcome, we try to look for one in which all citizens are benefited, none are potentially harmed by taking a particular action. And if you look at the company's proposal in this particular instance, it's clearly the case that these participating customers are going to wind up getting significant benefits associated with the AMI and will have access to even more benefits in their own energy decisions. And these participating customers are going to be the ones that actually have to pay additional costs and are demonstrably worse off because they have to pay a fee and they don't get to keep their existing meter, even though they may prefer to do that. That's not a good public policy outcome. That's not an optimal public policy outcome.
Excuse me, just to clarify, you're speaking now about non-participants, the
Yes, ma'am.
opt-out persons. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I said, yes, ma'am.
So in your opinion, let's say in the future, you're sent to another portion of the United States to work on something similar to this. And the power company says, you know what? We're not going to charge anybody anything more because we're going to save the ratepayer and the company millions because we can do the proper forecasting. We can make better decisions when we need to sell power or buy power. We'll save millions on that. We'll be able to move transmission in a much more efficient way because we have up to the minute load, information. We won't have to have as many meter readers and we won't have to have the people do the connects and disconnects. Isn't it feasible to say a power company could say, we'll do the whole thing at no cost to the ratepayer? Do you believe that's a possibility?
You know, anything's a possibility. That utility would have to make that financial business case and they would have to take it to their management and their board of directors and their shareholders. And if they made that case, those are the people that are going to make those decisions. My experience in the energy business, not just in power, but in pipelines, underground storage, LNG, you name it, is if you're going to make a capital investment, you got to take it to your board of directors and ultimately your shareholders, and you got to prove that out. And if they can do that, well, then fine. That would be great.
Do you believe that some companies could have done that and have not?
I don't know. I haven't
No.
looked.
Okay.
It's
No
a
more
very
questions.
large capital investment, so I don't know.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, before we continue with questions, just let's stand at ease for 1 minute. President Brown, do you have any questions for this witness?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do. Mr. Dismukes. Do you have your testimony in front of you?
Yes, sir. I got it.
Can you turn to page 18 of your direct testimony? Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions about your recommendations and then your justifications for the same. But I just want to understand what I think what you testified to, at least a fundamental principle. You testified that other states have, or other commissions have allowed their utilities, if you will, or authorized their utilities to charge for an opt-out service, correct?
Correct.
And then I believe in response to one of Ms. Himes' questions, you did recognize that there is a cost associated with a customer. Let me rephrase if I may. So you've testified, as I understand it, that if a utility establishes a baseline for what it desires in its meters, correct? That if a customer chooses a different option and opts out of what the baseline is, there is a cost associated with that, correct? Is that your testimony?
I think it depends on the customer and what they actually wind up choosing to do in this instance. If they're preserving their existing service without shifting the meter, those costs could be negligible to none.
Okay, so with that baseline established, let's walk through your recommendations then, if we may. So the bottom of page 18. Okay, starting with line 20, and then I recommend.
Yes, sir.
Right there. So if I just may read your testimony, you write, I recommend that the commission waive all opt-out fees for customers participating in the AMO tariff and pick up any cost shortfalls in general residential retail-based revenues, electric and natural gas, correct?
Right.
And so I understand if I understand your testimony correctly, your testimony is that any cost associated with a customer opting out of the norm would just then be picked up in a general electric and natural gas case, and the cost would be borne by every other customer of the utility, as I understand it.
Well, those costs would be included into distribution rates, and they would be settled just the way normal distribution rates are. To the extent that the revenue recoveries from these customers are short, you would have to net those to the efficiency gains in the O&M that are and the other savings that are created by the other customers. And from the numbers I've seen, those numbers should be substantially large enough to net those out. So there's no net subsidy created as a consequence of this.
So as I understand your testimony, then that rationale then underpins your recommendation that the commission not take any action or approve any additional opt-out charge at this point in time.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. All right, so then turn to page 19 of your testimony.
Yes, sir.
Line 13, starting with therefore.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'm just going to read your testimony. You write, therefore, the commission should not establish opt-out fees until updated and accurate information regarding opt-out costs become available, correct?
Correct.
So the way I understand your recommendation is that it's not, and please correct me if I'm wrong here. What I understand from your recommendation is you're not taking, or the MCC is not you, the MCC is not taking the position today that should Northwest Energy want to establish an opt-out fee, that isn't an unreasonable position to take as a general rate-making practice, correct?
There's an argument for doing that. I would argue, just based on looking at the numbers that I've looked at here, that these aren't the cost causers in terms of, and the cost that the company is imposing on these customers is unreasonable. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we're approving a tariff, right? And tariffs have rates, right? And we set rates based on known and measurables, right? We don't have known and measurables here, right? And these fees are, I'm not exactly quite sure how they're tied to costs, if they're tied in any way. I mean, they're not, by the company's own admission. So there's no claim to efficiency or known and measurable in the company's tariff to begin with. That's a presumption, right?
So that's where I was going with Dr. Dismukes is that essentially, as I understand your testimony is that you don't believe the commission is in a position based on what has been evidentiarily presented to make a sound determination of what is appropriate opt-out fee to set.
I don't. And I would also argue that, these are not the cost causers in the bigger scheme of the adoption of AMI. And if we're really going to start wagging our finger on cost causation, I think we need to consider the participating customers and the benefits that they get on this, and the fact that there's often cost sharing when we create these bigger system-wide benefits. Energy efficiency is a great case in point, right? We go in, we have participating and non-participating customers in that process. 5, 10, 7, 8% of the customers in a retail class may wind up participating in an individual measure. 97% of the other customers are paying for all those costs, but they create system benefits for everybody. So it's fair and reasonable to do that. That's essentially the argument I'm making here is we're creating these benefits for the system and for the utility and all ratepayers. This is just a cost of doing business.
And so to follow that line of thinking, if you will, we were talking about concept of cost causer versus cost payer, correct? And so we are sitting here today because the Montana legislature has passed a bill that made it the public policy of the state of Montana that customers of regulated utilities in Montana can opt out of the company's, in this case, Northwestern Energy's AMI project, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so in a way, we are dealing with the fact that the Montana legislature has made a decision to allocate costs, correct, in a way?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dismukes. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hamilton, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one, Doctor, could you please refer to page number 11 of your testimony?
Okay.
All right, on page number 11, lines 12 and 13, I'll just read it. I recommend that the company's opt-out customers be provided the option of keeping existing meters.
Mhm.
Then you have footnote 22. And in that footnote, second sentence, you say that customers whose meters reach the end of their estimated service life should have their meter replaced in the normal course of business. Did I read all that correctly?
Yes.
When you say meter replaced in the normal course of business, are you saying that they should be replaced with another meter of the type that was their prior meter? Or are you saying that the normal course of business would mean replacing it with whatever meter Northwestern has as its paradigm?
So my intent is that they should be able to replace it with the meter that they want, which could be the one that they have, the AMR meter in this instance.
Just for clarity, they in that
They being
sentence.
non-participating customers.
Okay,
Not opt-out customers, I'm sorry, opt-out customers. They should be able to. I would admit, and I think I would recognize, and I think there would be an opportunity to revisit that situation and inform and educate the customers at that time and ask them, you know, are you sure we Northwestern are here, we have to replace your meter. Do you want to re-up again for your opt-out, or would you like to move forward with the AMI? Providing the information on AMI, et cetera, and use that as an opportunity for further education. If those customers say, no, I want to keep the AMR, then they should be able to do that.
okay. They should be able to keep the AMR, which is their existing meter at the time of this project's rollout. That is a third option other than the AMI, other than the non-communicating digital meter.
Yeah, based on the filing today, yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, seeing no further questions from the commission, would Northwestern like to recross?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of brief ones. Dr. Dismukes, given your long history in the industry and especially with AMI, as you were having conversations with the commission about health issues and the anecdotal health issues, do you think that a utility is really in the best place to judge whether or not someone's health concerns are legit?
Yeah, I don't know that that's the role of a utility. Now, I would say that, you know, making information available and directing those customers and ratepayers to legitimate and qualified and expert resources would be part of that responsibility, but yeah, I think I'd have a hard time with the utility doing something.
Thank you. You spoke about the demand response efforts that come from AMI, the opportunities that AMI affords.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure the record is clear. Those demand response opportunities are predicated on a full deployment of AMI.
Yes, that's usually the case.
Are you aware of any examples of utility rebates as a consequence of AMI deployment? And I would refer you to the analysis that you did of opt-out fees. The analysis that Ms. Fang did of opt-out fees.
I think I know what you're talking about, and in the spirit of what you're asking, I don't think no, but I will qualify this in the sense that within demand response programs, there can be credits, right? But on the just implementation issue, no, I'm not aware of any.
Thank you. So just a last question. I was interested in your comment that you just made related to AMI, these type of capital costs sometimes are the cost of doing business, that they get capitalized, they get spread out. They're the cost of doing business. I'm struggling with that a little bit in light of the evidence that both you and Ms. Fang have put into the record of so many utilities charging opt-out fees. Isn't it fair to say that it actually, most commissions, most utilities have found that it actually is more appropriate to charge at least some modest fee to recover the costs?
I'll let the fees speak for what they are. I can't say for each and every one. Every state's different. There are fees. Yes, I'll agree there are fees.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple clarifications. Commissioner Brown characterized our position as urging the commission to not take any action at this time. Do you recall that?
Yes.
But could the commission approve a tariff that essentially accepts all of our recommendations in this case?
I believe they could, yes.
So are you urging the commission not to approve any tariff in this case?
I'm not. I think modifying the existing tariff based on the recommendations I have is an option. The commission could, though, in theory, send the company back and say, come back later and maintain the voluntary program until we have more information.
Enough. Okay. And then Ms. Heim just asked you whether most demand response programs are predicated on full deployment of AMI. Can you explain to me how an opt-out rate of, let's say, around, up to 1% or around 1% could affect the demand response programs if you roll out AMI and let's say 1% of customers opt out of that AMI? Does that mean that the utility can't do demand response?
No, not at all. I see those as being independent issues. One associated with the decision of opting out, and then the other associated with the programs and the leverage essentially that the utility will be providing on the asset it invests in.
Okay. So I guess what I'm getting at is, would you agree that even with an opt-out program, a utility can utilize AMI to implement some demand response programs?
I agree, yes.
Okay. And maybe I'm overreaching here a little. But if a utility, or beating this horse to death, but if a utility rolls out AMI and let's say 1% of customers opt out of that, would you characterize that as a full deployment of AMI?
Well, when I'm thinking about deployment, I'm thinking about how the infrastructure has gotten put into place relative to the total market scope. If we're going to do 225,000 customers, do all 225,000 customers have AMI?
And so if there's an opt-out and something less than all 220,000 get AMI, that would be less than full deployment?
I would think that the deployment trajectory would include an adjustment for opt-outs, so it would be net of opt-outs.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dismukes. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, can I clarify just one issue on this full deployment? Because I think we're talking past each other. My question was related to full deployment of the entire program across our service territory, not netting out opt-out, just getting through all the years of getting the meters installed.
Thank you.
Okay. There are no further questions for the witness. Dr. Dismukes, you are temporarily dismissed. Thank
Okay,
you, or
thank you.
excused, I
Dismissed.
should say. Did either of the parties reserve introduction of rebuttal testimony? Do you have rebuttal testimony that you would like to go to?
Madam Chair, we actually introduced our rebuttal testimony contemporaneously with our direct so that we don't have any additional testimony.
Okay, and Mr. Brown? No additional, okay. All right, well, I think we're at the point we're almost waiting for. Do parties wish to make a brief closing statement?
Well, actually, Madam Chair, if we could take a brief break, I'd like to consult with my witnesses. I would like to make a closing statement and or a motion. So I need a few minutes.
It's fair. It's 3:18 now. We will take a 10-minute recess and be back on the record at 3:28. We are now off the record. We are back on the record. The time is now 3:37. I believe the floor is yours, Ms. Heim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I've got, my note cards are taking over. So in our dockets, we rarely do closing arguments. It just hasn't been a normal part of our practice, offered but not often utilized. And so I would like to take this moment to offer kind of a combination of closing argument, very brief, but also to make a motion to the commission. Excuse me. Closing obviously gets me all choked up. It's interesting. I was reflecting on my opening statement, and the last thing I said to you in my opening statement was that we look forward to a robust conversation with the commission and the Consumer Council. Well, that apparently has borne itself out, because I think we have had a very robust conversation today, and we appreciate that conversation very much. Our view of the choice before the commission today was whether or not you assign opt-out costs to who we perceive to be the cost causer, someone choosing a non-standard service, or whether you spread those costs out amongst all consumers. At the end of the hearing, it is clear to me that we missed an important point. We did not consider the retention of an AMR meter. From our experience, the utilities perspective, the customer comments we get are all about RF radiation. We don't want an RF meter. So our perception of this problem was, it was very finite. Either you get the industry or our utility standard meter, or you get what we perceived that customers wanted, which is a non-communicating meter. And so I think we missed the mark. And so our proposal did not include any testimony, any part of a proposal to retain that meter, what it would look like, what the cost structure might look like. You did get a little testimony from Ms. Fang about that, but I'm concerned that it was our obligation to put a proposal in front of you, and it didn't include what you expected it to. So to the motion portion, I would move that the commission stay the docket for 90 days and give us a chance to do better, to come back with a proposal that hopefully we can get to common ground with the MCC on the AMR issue, at least try to figure out what does it look like post meter fail. Do you replace that meter with AMR? Is that even possible for us? What does that cost structure look like? I think that our conversation yesterday and today have been incredibly informative. I would recommend that we hold this docket open and that we refile a proposal and or a settlement in this docket. So this work has not been for naught. It has had an incredible amount of value, and we appreciate the conversation, but I would really like an opportunity for us to try again. We filed our proposal, we had 180 days, and we worked hard at it, and we put a lot of company resources behind it. And it just wasn't part of my experience with the regulatory process, with the legislation. The retention of that meter was not part of what I thought was important, and I was wrong. And so I would hope that the commission would give us the benefit of a little bit of time to do it better. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, you've heard the motion. Any response to that?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm going to oppose the motion, which I normally wouldn't do for routine utility filing. But I don't see this as a routine utility filing. I see this as implementation of a state policy that's been in the works for years now. With all due respect to Ms. Hyman Northwestern, I really feel like there's no excuse for missing the explicit language in this commission's rule, which the company was well aware of and commented on. I believe that declining installation of an advanced metering device and retaining the existing meter has been in the law now it's been in the law in the commission's rules since December 11th of 2021. I'm sensitive to the statement that this proposal could have been done better, and I appreciate the willingness to try to make it better, and would like to go along with that, but I'm not going to, because I feel like it's not fair to consumers who have been waiting for clarity on this. And although those consumers who we're clearly focused on, who simply want to retain their existing meter, would be, I think, okay in the meantime, those consumers who want a meter as defined in 69-4-1001 would be in a position of continuing to wait and not have that option until, and all as a result of the company's failure to read the rule and make a proposal in line with the legislative intent in the rule. So I think that the ball is in this commission's court for a reason at this point. I think the legislature has put this ball in your court, and your rule gave the company 180 days to make this filing. So this is, I believe, a time-sensitive matter, especially for those customers who would like to opt out and receive a non-communicating digital meter. So I'm going to oppose the motion. And I would also just add that, you know, utilities are free to file practically whatever they want in front of regulatory commissions, whether they're supported or not. So I think it's important to keep in mind that Northwestern can come back and initiate a new proposal any day they want to. And in the meantime, I guess I don't want to be complicit in taking this matter out of this commission's hands after it's, I think, been placed in your hands for very deliberately. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm prepared to rule on the motion, and that ruling is simply that the commission will take this under advisement and take it up during a future publicly noticed meeting for action. Not prepared to take action today. We didn't notice this up as an action meeting today. So with that being said, does the Montana Consumer Council have a closing brief statement that they would like to make?
Madam Chair, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you to the parties and the witnesses, our clerk recorder, and my colleagues here on the rostrum for your hard work and patience through this process. The evidentiary hearing is now closed, and we will open the public comment period again. If there are any public commenters who have not had an opportunity to comment. Are there any in the room that have not had an opportunity to comment that wish to render a public comment? Seeing none, are there any online? There are no public commenters online. Okay. The public comment portion is closed. We are now off the record. It's 3:45 p.m. We will take up the scheduling conference. 5 to 10 minutes suffice? Okay, let's
Madam Chair,
we're not
do we-
off the record yet because there's still somebody who wants to speak on the record. Is that correct?
Well, I think just to the scheduling conference, I think maybe we'll wait for a scheduling conference until after the commission.
Mr. Brown?
I will defer to staff on scheduling briefing if it's desired, or I'm willing to submit the case without briefing if that's easier.
Okay, Mr. Hamilton.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Parties, you don't anticipate needing any briefing other than the argument that was just presented on the motion pending, right?
That's correct. We do not intend to brief the motion.
Not sure. Well, I'm a little confused now as to whether that was the question. I think we all agree we're not intending to brief the motion. We just spoke to the motion, so we'll let that, but. And so, okay, sorry. If that's the question, then I would agree. We don't need to brief the motion. Sorry.
Very well. Then, Madam Chair, what I would recommend is that at this point, we would not need the scheduling conference. We
Okay.
can take that up after the motion is ruled on.
Excellent. Well, then, for the record, the time is 3:47 p.m. The date is February 1st, 2023. The hearing is adjourned.